Thank you so much, Scott, and thank you all for being here. I'm very excited to be here and share some of the research and ideas that span both my lab and many collaborators and Center for Ocean Solutions. And so where the oceans and the land are connected through climate, economies, movements and migration of animal and people. But where they physically come together is along the coastline of our planet. And this is where very important ecosystems like corals and seagrasses and salt marshes and mangroves, hotspots of biodiversity and productivity, systems that provide irreplaceable services like carbon sequestration and coastal protection, come together with coastal lands, cities, and communities in integrated, intertwined social ecological systems, where the outcome of the behaviors, the dynamics of the system is determined by the feedback and interactions between the physical environment, the ecosystems, and the human communities and institutions. And the outcome of this interaction is important because coastlines are a real hotspot, the concentration of all of the sustainability challenges that we think about in the school and around the world. And this is also occurring over a vast part of our planet. The estimated length of our coastline is close to the distance between the Earth and the Moon, or going around our planet 10 times. So it's a very vast part of our planet and really important social ecological systems, social environmental systems that occur in these areas. A key social environmental system that we find in coastal areas are fisheries and aquaculture that produce the food and jobs that so many people, billions of people around the world, depend on. And this is not only the industrial, large-scale fisheries that you see here in this image, but the small and mid-sized enterprises that produce over 2/3 of the blue food or aquatic foods that we consume, employ through full and part-time jobs over 90% of the people engaged in this sector, and support the nutrition and livelihoods of billions of people. This sector is often characterized as dysfunctional and marginal. And as a result, it doesn't receive the support, the resources that other sectors, including the industrial fisheries and aquaculture sector, receive. However, this sector is also highly diverse and highly dynamic. And this provides for significant resilience or the capacity to absorb shocks and maintain functions and services in the face of shocks from climate, from market, political shocks, social shocks, including the recent pandemic. And as an example of this resilience, this was a study led by Caroline Ferguson, who was a former EIPER student, that together with collaborators from Fiji, Palau, and 5 other Western Pacific nations, analyzed the results of over 600 interviews with actors, men and women, living in 7 island nations of the Western Pacific, examining the impacts of the pandemic in the early months of the pandemic on food security. And what the study found illuminates is that local food production and food sharing by small-scale fishery and aquaculture were tremendously important in supporting food security and, in fact, maintaining it in a majority of these cases. So given the diversity and the importance of this system, a key question is, what are the processes that promote resilience and adaptive capacity? And this is fundamentally important, both because we need to understand the dynamic of complex systems, and also because this informs then solutions, both for nature, for ecosystems, and for people, and which is a part that I'm very excited about. So I'm going to start illustrating this dynamic through a case study of a system in the peninsula of Baja California, just south of us. And this is where a desert meets a highly productive, highly diverse coastal ecosystems supported by these marine forests in this area supported by giant kelp, but around the world formed by many different species of algae. And a recent study estimated that the area and the productivity of marine forests around the world are comparable to the Amazon forest, but they're distributed in a thin strip around all continents of the world. So a tremendous potential, again, for food production, biodiversity provision, but also carbon sequestration, coastal protection, and all the important systems that forests on land and in the ocean provide. This is my happy place. It's incredibly, stunningly beautiful. This region also has feeding and breeding grounds for sharks and sea turtles and seabirds and many other important species, and also support fisheries, small-scale fisheries all along the coast that are organized in exclusive access rights in turfs or territorial use rights for fishers, where the Mexican government has awarded exclusive rights to harvest a suite of species to communities that live along the coast that manage those polygons, those marine territories that you see in the map. And this, in this particular region, species vary all across Mexico and Latin America and other regions that use a similar management system. But in this system, the species include high-value species like abalone and other mollusks. This is a big snail that lives on kelp, harvested by divers. And then also other fisheries like trap lobster fishery that you see here, which was actually the first small-scale fisheries to receive the certification as a sustainable fishery by the Marine Stewardship Council in 2004. So I had the privilege of being involved in a participatory science and action program for the past 20 years, almost 20 years, in collaboration with the fishing cooperatives themselves, with NGOs in Mexico, particularly Comunidad Biodiversidad, and many colleagues in academic institutions. And this project from the onset has always started from the needs and the vision of the communities. With a process of feedback, of iterative consultation, and co-development of the research question and approaches done through sharing and transfer of knowledge and capacity between the community and partners in all of these different institutions. And so I love this picture because in this picture, which is 15 years ago, the person in the middle is a top authority in fishery biology of coastal fisheries in Mexico, Dr. Guzman del Pro. And then on the boat, there's members of the cooperatives, there's the resource managers, there's students, 2 hyper students and 2 biology students, and then went on to become professors and leaders in NGOs and government agencies. And so lots of time in the field, learning together, and this is really what has been perhaps one of the most important aspects in terms of training for this project. So what do? We paired traditional oceanographic methods and technologies with an effort to democratize the collection of this data by co-developing training manuals and training activities, and that increase the access by the communities to low-cost technologies, both in oceanography as well as hydrophone, environmental DNA, and other techniques. For the biology, the ecology of the system, again, we paired more traditional scientific methods with low-cost experimental devices, for example, to measure tolerance of different species, the abalone and the lobster, to heat ramps. And as I mentioned before, this also involved the training of community divers, initially men, but then over the years, groups of women in the community that have engaged in the monitoring of the kelp forest ecosystem, have participated in the conduction of genetic study, ecological experiments, to just get a better understanding, bring their understanding, but also get a better understanding of how these systems are behaving and responding to change. And then finally, because the giant kelps in this region, the dominant algae, come up all the way to the surface, you can can track it with Landsat, with satellite imagery. And so this has enabled the development of a time series of nearly 40 years of data at the kilometer square scale to track the changes in biomass and distribution of kelp with collaborators from UCLA, Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, and the cooperatives and agencies involved in this project. Finally, for the social sciences, we've used a variety of approaches, including behavioral economic experiments conducted in the fields with group of fishers, informed by the biology and ecological study, to develop treatments, and then through the experiment, better understand the revealed behavior, the responses of the actors to changes in their resources and environmental conditions. And we have then expanded this program to collaborate with similar programs in Peru, Chile, Argentina, and Uruguay to foster learning exchanges and also develop a general theory of adaptive capacity in small-scale fisheries, leveraging the knowledge and the long-term collaborations of these different areas. So very briefly, some of the results that have emerged from these collaborative studies are that the recent marine heat wave, the marine heat wave that has affected the Pacific in 2014 to 16, the longest and largest recorded to date, has resulted in an over 50% decline of the kelps and all of the species associated with it, both revealed by the in situ monitoring and the satellite data, not only in Baja California, but throughout the California current. And then these impacts, this tremendous loss of production and biodiversity is compounded by other stressors, which include extreme hypoxia, low oxygen conditions that develop in the waters and that result in mass mortality of a suite of different organisms and the collapse and closure of many of these fisheries. This is the first time that these events were detected in this area, which is an open coast environment, not an estuarine and bay affected by eutrophication. Through the leadership of the community, a network of oceanographic sensors, of low-cost oceanographic sensors, has allowed for a very detailed measurement of temperature and oxygen and other conditions of the water at a fine scale for several years across the region. And one of the important results is that the local manifestation of these large events, the marine heat wave, the hypoxic event, is highly, highly variable. This is an example. These are two locations that are less than a kilometer away from each other that exhibit vast differences both in the means and patterns of variability of temperature and dissolved oxygen concentration in seawater, which then laboratory studies that we conducted revealed to be lethal in some cases, but not in others, between the two sites for the organisms of interest. So through the sensors and through analysis of the satellite data, where we examine the persistence of kelp over these long periods of 4 decades, we are able to identify climate refugia, area in this region that are less vulnerable to the impacts of climate extremes or recover more quickly, that then the communities can leverage for conservation, restoration, and management effort to promote, support local adaptation. One of these measures has been the establishment of voluntary community marine reserves, closed areas that the community set up to allow for the recovery of some of the species following the collapses from environmental stressors. And through the kelp forest monitoring that I have described, as well as region-wide expeditions that we have conducted after the heat waves at all of this location around the bay, we were able to document a role of the marine reserves and well-managed turfs of the concession, both of the special management approaches, in promoting the recovery of depleted population following these mass mortalities. So reserves cannot protect these ecosystems from these extremes, but boost their recovery and result in a greater magnitude and rates of change. And then finally, with access to appropriate rights and resources, these communities can be agents of change and respond and mitigate to the impacts of problems that are caused at regional and global scale, but affect them locally. So if we zoom back out, this is one case among many, among a huge variety of different kinds, contexts of small-scale fishing and aquaculture. So this is an asset in terms of resilience and adaptive capacity, but it's also a big challenge. It's very difficult to implement and devise interventions that can scale, that can transfer, and that, in fact, in some cases, don't cause unintended consequences. So to tackle this diversity, we have conducted an analysis. This is part of the Blue Food assessment that Jim Leap has described in a prior call, where together with a large group of international collaborators, we analyzed 70 case studies of small-scale fishery and aquaculture, spanning supply chain at different locations around the world, to classify, essentially to map the diversity of circumstances. For example, distance to market, from local subsistence to export to international markets, the degree of specialization, the governance, the capital investment or technologies used over typologies that then can be mapped to potential levers for change, to policy intervention, and so start to simplify this complexity to point to path for action. And so some of the actions that were identified by this analysis include the imperative of maintaining spaces for the small-scale sector that is often squeezed out by the development of other coastal sectors. This is particularly important for the rights of indigenous community around the world, supporting the entrepreneurship and innovation through investment in human and social capital, ensuring that the nutritional benefits of the blue food that these systems grow or harvest benefit the local communities, and also promoting gender inclusions, as women make up almost half of the workforce in this sector, but often lack a voice, power, and support. So supporting the viability of small-scale fisheries and aquaculture around the world is absolutely vital, not only for equitable, resilient, healthy food system, but for healthy, resilient, equitable social ecological system, ecosystems and community around the world. And so investments in this system have a clear path to scale along the coasts of our planet. And I'm incredibly excited about the potential of the Doerr School of Sustainability to foster the kind of collaboration and innovation that can arise from innovation in economics, in political science, in genomics, in technologies, to provide solutions to some of the major challenges that coastal communities face around the world. Thank you so much.